Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IRF Executive Talk, where the road sector's top minds think out loud about the challenges, ideas, and leadership defining our industry. My name is Alice Yu. I am the head of advocacy and outreach at the International Road Federation, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by Mike Evans, director of Arup. Mike, welcome.
Very good to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike, for joining us. For those who are watching, Arup is one of the world's leading and largest global consultancy with extensive technical and advisory expertise, working across a number of sectors, including transport, energy, water, property, cities, and more. And Mike, you lead Arup's roads and streets businesses globally, as well as the transport business in Europe. You're a civil engineer by training with many years of experiences working with transport authorities, governments, contractors to shape and deliver road and transportation systems that drive connectivity, accessibility, and long-term resilience. So in a nutshell, you're really the ideal person to have this conversation with. And I'm sure it's a very timely one because we're seeing right now in the road sector, there's a genuine shift, not just in what we're building, but also in why we're building it and who is meant to serve. So I really look forward to having this conversation with you. Before that, I wanted to ask, maybe let's start with a bit of an existential question, right? Mike, you've spent your career working on roads. So what is it about roads that keeps you so passionate about this work?
Right. I have been fascinated by roads and streets since I was a kid. I am working in the thing that I always wanted to work in. I enjoy thinking about how people travel around. I come from the west of Ireland. So when I grew up, it was a remote place. I lived in a county in the west coast, very far away from everything. So I can remember that moment, being able to travel, whether it was walk, bike, as you grow older, and then eventually a car. It all relates to freedom. It allows you to get to places you could not be. And so for me, it's linked to the fact that people get to have autonomy and get to do the things they want to do. And I don't think we think about that enough. What I do enables people to get to, in my case, to school, to get jobs, to get to hospitals, to get to do the recreation, all of those things. So how you walk and how you cycle and how you use your car and how we use public transport on our road networks in remote places like where I came from really matters. So I think it's quite an interesting job. I think if I talk to the young people that are working in our teams now, when I started off, we were using cars that have been around for 100 years. We're using road construction materials around for 100 years. It's so much more exciting now. There's so much more technology. There's a huge amount of evolution in what we can do. You've got electric vehicles reducing emissions. You've got autonomous vehicles. We've got the vehicles are connected to the network, so we can control things, influence things much more. The way we think about public transport, cycling facilities, all of this is just so much better than it was when I started. So I think it's also quite an exciting time to be in the industry as well.
I can hear the passion. I can feel it. I know I'm not an engineer by training, but I definitely share the passion for transport as well. And I think you're so right. I love some of the keywords that you're mentioning, and I really agree. I think what makes roads so unique is that because it's really one of the most universal, pieces of infrastructure in the world. Everyone uses them every day. And there's something very deeply embedded in our lives that we use sometimes without noticing it. So I'm very glad that you bring out some of these parts that excites you so much. But I think what we have discussed before also with some of our community members is that the sector sometimes struggle to connect with the public, even though it's being used on a daily basis. Sometimes there's public opposition to road projects, there are community pushbacks, or sometimes people are just simply indifferent to what is happening around roads around them. And so people perceive roads also as noisy, as polluting, something that divides their neighborhoods or something that disrupts nature, and not necessarily something that is done for them. So is that something that you see in your work as well? And why has the question of public trust become so important for the road sector today?
I think there's two parts to answering that question. I think when you live on the street or you live in a lane in the countryside and you use that, you understand the benefit that you're getting from it. So it relates to your immediate life. But when we build big roads, and sometimes I walk along the edges of our very big motorways, wearing a high-vis jacket and all of that protection, they're not pretty places. They're scary places. They're dangerous places. And immediately, if you're going to have one of these in your neighborhood or beside where you live, they are not, they're not a welcome intrusion. So it's very important that we explain to people why they're required. But then there's another part of that. An awful lot of the time, the people who use our road networks, their experience of our road networks is not optimal either. They're not safe. They're congested. They don't enable the journeys that they actually want to make. And people don't have the choices that they'd like to be able to make for their journeys. Sometimes there are people in our road networks and they're in cars on their own. They don't want to be in a car on their own, spending too much time. They'd much rather be on a bus or a train, much more convenient, be able to read a newspaper or look at their emails, whatever it is. So there's a balance about creating a service and thinking about the people who use our networks as users and customers, that their experience. And if they're not getting what they want, so the intrusion is not optimal and the experience is not optimal, trust is eroded, I suppose, is the way of putting it.
Yeah, no, I like the word optimal. And I really think that this is the word that kind of defines our society these days. Everything that we do, and we want to say, are we using our time most effectively? Are we using the asset most effectively? Are we using our money and the resources in the most optimal way, right? So the idea of optimizing our infrastructure has so much to connect to public trust and legitimacy and how we spend the money for these road projects. And I think that's a really interesting point, because you also raised about in your first question, you didn't talk about cars and materials. Back in those days, we're running, and now we kind of evolved to a different, the sector is evolving so quickly. And I mean, for many decades, success in transport was essentially measured in very limited ways, right? How many vehicles can we move in a certain period of time? How fast they're moving? How far they can go from one end to another? But I think I read something some time ago. Global car ownership was like 50 million cars on the road in the 1950s, and now it's like 1.4 billion cars on the road, right? This is huge, massive growth over just decades. For the longer time, building more road capacity was kind of like the obvious answer to accommodate this phenomenon. But how do you think this mindset is evolving today?
I think, if I go back to when I was a much younger person, been interested in roads, it was always about building more roads. As a kid, I'd sketch out the roads and they'd be getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they will be full of more cars. We live in a different age, so we understand planetary boundaries. We understand the need for the circular economy. We understand the need to reduce the amount of materials that we use. But more than that, I think you used the word trust earlier on. We must be trusted by government to provide infrastructure that is efficient, and part of that efficiency is affordable, so that we use the least amount of not just resources but money to build what we need, so that's affordable. So that's what's quite exciting. Coming back to that word optimal, if we can optimize what we build, use the least amount of space, provide the amount of capacity is required, but not too much capacity, build what's needed today and think about how we would provide it more efficiently in the future. Another thing that's quite exciting is that, you spoke about counting vehicles that can travel on your road and how fast they can travel, switching to counting passengers, the number of people that are traveling. Once you do that quick change in your thinking, you begin to think about, well, can I have shared lanes? Can I have more buses on the network? Then the things that we can do about using information technology to help manage the flow on our network. And I was watching your talk on your channel lately, where you were talking about that. So it is quite exciting, and I often think about that there's a convergence of the railway network, which was a quite system network, controlled network, you can see the two modes kind of converging in terms of our use of technology to control the movement of vehicles. But then thinking beyond that, I'm often struck by when I'm reviewing something and we're building a major road around a city or a town bypass, and you look at, the first thing is try and understand where people are moving and what people are doing. Most of the trips are actually going to be very close to the place that you're looking for. And it's about creating the opportunity for journeys that are shorter. Maybe they don't need to be on your road network. Maybe if you provide cycling infrastructure, you can reduce the amount of demand on your major road network as well as giving people a more attractive choices.
I love it. I mean, you mentioned you grew up in Ireland. I actually grew up in Hong Kong, which is one of the smallest city in the world. No, it's a city with 7.5 million people, all packed in, I think, a territory of about just over 1,000 square kilometers. So it's really a very massive city with a lot of people that have very, very big transport needs.
Yes.
And so putting through passengers, it's the key, right? In a city where we really need to optimize every single inch of the territory that we have. And journeys are short. Journeys are very short, and we need to really make sure that roads are kind of like the bloodline of our transport systems. But we won't be able to move if everybody just kind of drive on the roads. We definitely need the public transit systems. We need the railways. We need the buses. We need the cycling. But I think it's very interesting that you raised that point, because in the case of Hong Kong, it's very hilly. So I never grew up learning how to cycle, very shamefully. Okay. I'm sorry. And I work in this industry. I know I do. I know how to bike right now. But growing up, I can't, because we don't have dedicated cycling lanes, and it's actually really dangerous to cycle if you're downtown. So I just took the buses, and that's just kind of how I learned to navigate around the journey. So I get at some point landscape, just how the place is geographically set up also really matters. And then the transport culture, the transit culture of that community also really matters in terms of how you really design the roads and the transit systems around it. And we keep coming back to the word optimal or efficient, and I want to throw in the word effective as well. I mean, if we check the dictionaries, maybe they're a little bit different. They're all kind of talking about the same thing, right? I think at some point we wanted to produce the intended results, right? We wanted to achieve the intended results of our projects or our programs. And Arup does so much projects around the world. So what do effective roads mean to Arup in practice then?
I think I should have known you were from Hong Kong, but I didn't realize. But Hong Kong's a really interesting test place. If you think about some of the things that we've just been talking about, Hong Kong has obviously got a fantastic metro system, one of the highest rates of public transport in the world in terms of using that. But when you think about road and street networks in Hong Kong, they're still quite important, because there are trips that can't take place on your fantastic metro system. So we need to provide for those trips to happen on the road and street network. And then, so you need a infrastructure that works. Hong Kong has had to, as you mentioned, the topography of Hong Kong is constrained in its geography. It's been expanding, reclamation is really important. So when you reclaim, you build really good public transport out to the new residential areas, but you need road infrastructure that goes out to serve that as well. That's really important. And then as we build that, we need to think about being really efficient in how we're doing. So an example is if you have a major bridge and you, rather than widen the bridge, can you use the hard shoulder on the lane, use traffic control to manage that safely so that you allow that lane to be used safely. How you toll is another way that you can make the network more efficient. We've worked on removing hard tolling and replacing it with electronic tolling, which allows traffic to move more freely. It also frees up the land that infrastructure, the tolling infrastructure was taking to be available for other things. So all of these things come together. Another really interesting thing about Hong Kong is, the bus system. How can you make sure that your bus system is working really well? We've been working with, currently in the UK, with the Department of Transport about how you make bus optimized systems. Coming back to Hong Kong, we think about autonomous vehicles. It's really important that autonomous vehicles, when we deploy them, that they're used to move people, not as individuals, but as a shared form of mobility. So in that hierarchy of mode, you have heavy trains to move large numbers of people. We have metros to move them in densely populated areas. But even in the city, Hong Kong, you can use a shared autonomous taxi to move a cohort of 4 people, which is the right number of people to be able to move. So that really comes to optimized, and that word efficient, that each trip is served by the right mode.
Yeah, I like that definition a lot. I think there's no silver bullet per se, right, in terms of sustainable transport options, right? All of our trips have an intended outcome, and sometimes you need different modes to get you to that outcome. So the most important thing I think that we see in terms of sustainable transport practices and policies is that we talked about. Sometimes we talk push and pull. Sometimes we will talk about avoid, shift, and improve framework, which essentially is just that we can't just go with one type of solution. We need different types of policies and innovations and interventions that helps avoid unnecessary motorized trips, how to shift to more sustainable transport modes like public transport or cycling and walking, and how to also improve the energy efficiency of the vehicles and the design and the energy sources and the operations of the road systems. So it's really a spectrum of interventions that we have to consider, right? And thanks for making me so proud of my hometown. I'm gonna be back later in the month, and I really look forward, to experiencing more with the transport system. But I know we've been talking about the developed part of the world a little bit, right? You're in Dublin, so it's a well-developed road networks. Very nice, probably very nice quality and standards for the roads. Going through some nice
Not as much as you think.
Oh, happy to hear that if you feel like it's appropriate.
We've a big road with a lot of congestion in Dublin, which people talk about a lot, and we need to build public transport to help solve the problem.
Yeah, how is it coming along?
It's coming along in terms of in Dublin. Hope to be working on a major metro scheme to connect the airport to the city centre, and that's one way of getting people off the orbital ring road, the M50, that will make that work. But then the M50 is quite an interesting road as well, because it's a very carefully managed road. It has to be, to allow the number of people to flow around it. But you were trying to move the conversation on to places that are in the developing world. And I think that's really interesting. I think that in the work that we do, it's really interesting in places. For example, we were working in Egypt and thinking about how we build infrastructure that will be climate resilient. That's really important to think about. This week we've had the really hot weather in Europe. But in other places that I travel to, the effect of climate is much more dramatic in terms of hurricanes and intense weather. So we need to build climate resilient infrastructure. I think it's also really interesting, if you take my learnings, there's always the opportunity, the places to leapfrog past places like Dublin and avoid the mistakes that were made in the planning of Dublin, a very just spread out city, build infrastructure that allows more compact cities, and that allows better planning. But also in terms of rural infrastructure, how do we build road networks that are dispersed, and that we don't jump to a large motorway solution when a more appropriately sized piece of infrastructure would be the right answer?
I'd like to follow up on that. Actually, this is a really interesting subject to think about, because when you take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, how they define rural access is just your proximity, well, the share of population to all season road. So speaking to resilience, so whether a road is operational across all different seasons and times in the year, but it only speaks about proximity. So it doesn't really talk about how long it takes for you to get to that road. It doesn't talk too much about the condition of the pavement to that bigger road that connects you to other parts of the city. So, I mean, in terms of rural networks, and you talked about these smaller infrastructure, what would those things be, and how do that make up that last or first mile connectivity that it can serve the developing region?
I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, that last and first mile is very different in a rural context than it is in an urban
Yes.
context. And the point that you're talking about is major national road networks, major roads, they rely on the secondary and tertiary roads to bring people to them to allow the journeys that need to be made. So you do need to think of the thing as a system, and that's really important. That's really interesting. I think then, you know, another point that you mentioned there is about the maintenance of a network, and it's really important that we're building that we think about the life cycle of what we're building. And make correct life cycle assessments. And that's really important always, because in terms of finance, so that the infrastructure we build is affordable to maintain and operate after it's built. It's not just about coming in and building something big, but it's also now much more important in terms of carbon. And we started earlier on, we were chatting about, you know, the circular economy came up between us. I think some of the work that we've done in the roads industry around how we take a much more sustainable view to the materials, you know, there's huge improvements in terms of asphalt, the amount of recycled asphalt content that we can use. We've reduced massively the temperatures of the way we make asphalt. So I'm really proud of the fact is that if you take the road construction materials, I think that we're much closer to net zero road construction materials than other parts of the construction industry. Now I've gone a little bit off topic there.
No, you're not.
But again, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're in the developed world or the developing world. I'm often struck by that we don't take into account that once you build a major road, it becomes a fast road. You encourage journeys, so you do induce trips that were not there, and that you need to think about providing infrastructure that is close to people, which reduces their need to take the trip in the first place. And that is another way of thinking about things, the way the system works. So the education system, the health system interact with the transport system, and how do we get that system to work efficiently? And back to that word efficiently there again.
Yes, yes. And I really like your point about I think we as human beings interact with the structure that we're placed in, right? A lot of times people see roads as static because, you know, they are concrete that are built there and they don't actually move, and that's true. But we react to it, and by then, you know, more different reactions, and it changes the pattern of our behavior, whether it's driving or using public transport or other transport modes. So it's a very dynamic system. Like roads are very, very dynamic, even though it is static. You know, that's the kind of like the irony to this. And if we don't really have this in our scenarios, you know, in terms of planning and having that foresight to know what's going to come when we build this road, then we're not going to be able to accommodate what's going to happen in terms of changes in that local community that respond to that road. But I do like your points about circularity and materials that are being used and the maintenance and all of these. I feel like also have an opportunity for strengthening the local communities as well in terms of social and economic opportunities. I mean, do you have any examples of, you know, care to elaborate how this affects the local communities in terms of social and economic opportunities and growth?
Yes, an interesting question for an engineer, but you do, I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, what we're building is for society. they was reading a report there last week about work that we were doing in Central Asia. The point of the work that we were doing is thinking about when we were building the road. Lighting is a thing that you think about. Lighting is something you need to carefully manage. If you provide too much of it, you can use too much energy. But also thinking about when you provide lighting, you make the space safer. And the more inclusive trips that you will allow. But what was really interesting about this report was a piece of work that we did, it also allowed street traders' hours to be extended because the hours at which it was safe to work were longer. And that was a really interesting example for me about thinking about the individual. And I think that is another part of planning and thinking about how we do things that has improved drastically. When I started off working, we used traffic models that thought about cars and fast and efficient. Now we model people and we think about the agency that they have. We use agent-based modeling to consider the actual journeys that people are making. And I think that is a way of thinking that improves the outcome for the people, as distinct from thinking about what you're doing just in terms of a conduit for moving vehicles. And then when you begin to design in response to that, you get much better outcome, but you get more efficient infrastructure and you get to save some money because you don't have to build as much of it.
Do you think we're better at measuring these outcomes than, let's say, 5 years ago?
I do. I think one of the things that I'm astounded by is and intrigued by is how AI is beginning to change what we can analyze. And our ability, I think that is going to be really exciting in the next 2-3 years. It improves how we think about things. Coming back to how you analyze asphalt, our ability to see the defects on the road network. We used to examine those videos that came in. We would identify the cracks, but now being able to train the AI model to find the crack for us, we can process an awful lot more information, and that begins to change things. You bring that and you connect that to the connected vehicles and harness that technology. That's extraordinarily exciting as well.
I mean, that's really interesting that you mentioned that because just early last month, I was actually attending the World Transport Convention in Tianjin, China. Of all places, in the world, I think China is also a very leading figure in terms of AI application in the road sector. It was a full day of symposium. There's one technical presentation after another about AI, about automation, data, self-driving, flying cars. There's so much to offer in the innovation space. And it was like going to a carnival, as a transport passionate person, just sitting there and listening to all kinds of new things happening. But I think you mentioned about something that was also much of a recurring theme that I heard from these experts in that part of the world. Is this idea between being preventive or being responsive as transport system? Care to weigh in to teach us what's the difference between preventive and responsive, and how technology is making a difference to that?
Yeah. I mean, in the world that I work in, we have very big pieces of infrastructure, bridges, for example. We tend to take an approach to a bridge that we build it to last for a very long time. Our design life for a bridge will be 80 to 120 years. It's really interesting contrasting that with the other assets that we have, which is asphalt. And asphalt has a shorter life. So we've always thought of asphalt about managing its deterioration and been able to predict its maintenance. And the thing that's really important, obviously, with a road surface is that you do preventative maintenance, which then extends its lifespan. And shallow makes the deterioration curve much more shallow. I think it's going to be really interesting that we take that approach and apply it to those other longer assets. And what becomes really interesting is that we, as we refurbish things, we can apply technology and manage the asset in real time. And this is where it gets really connected. You know, the prospect of being able to measure the load on our infrastructure and respond to that, but that being responsive, which is just you see the problem arise and then you repair it at that point, that's much more expensive than taking a preventative approach. And this comes back to a proper life cycle approach to our assets, well-managed assets. And, you know, just bring it all back to the start of your question. I think you used the word trust. If we can demonstrate that we're providing value for money in maintaining and operating efficient networks, and explain that that is a much cheaper approach to our infrastructure than to build it, let it deteriorate, and then replace it, which is much more expensive. And of course, maintaining is obviously the most circular approach that you can take in the first place. Keep it in use, reuse. So these things are all part of the system that we're trying to provide, I suppose. And it is quite interesting and exciting, as I said earlier on, that these techniques are becoming available to us.
Yeah, I mean, you're very right. And it's not just value for money. A lot of times it's value for taxpayers' money, isn't it? So absolutely important to really prove that point, that there's an economic case to good maintenance, to life cycle approaches. And you're very right. I mean, that traditional approach is essentially a system that reacts to failure, right? Like you just kind of wait for failure to be reported and then you go and fix it. And so there's a newer and better way that we can approach, whether it's road safety, whether it's maintenance, whether it is climate resilience, or resolving congestion and traffic management. All of that could kind of take that mentality and take that mindset, and in order to kind of save money, save time, and actually improve operations of the agencies and authorities that takes care of those assets. I've learned a lot today, Mike. I really think, I really enjoy this conversation. And I think, essentially as the International Road Federation, that's what we're trying to do. We try to influence the sector with better mindsets, better practice, better policies, better innovation. So colleagues like you are really very helpful in terms of sharing the insights and the foresights with our community to see what are the new changes that we can take on just today, and how we can apply it to practice. So looking ahead, what do you think will define successful road agencies and infrastructure leaders over the next decade?
Well, let's talk a little bit about what they're going to encounter. So in well-developed road networks, the networks are old, they're aging, and they're going to need to be refurbished and replaced. The climate is going to provide us with a lot more challenges, so we're going to have to think about the resilient infrastructure. In face of all of this society change, changes to our economic growth, governments are challenged by funding. So you join up all of those things. What are we going to have to face? What success is going to look like is how we deal with all of that. I think that there's huge opportunity in the new infrastructure that we build to bring new technology onto that system. I think that in the networks that we already have, as we make those networks, refurbish them and make them future fit, we can make them much better than that. It's really interesting to me in places like Germany and the UK. We get to fix some of the mistakes that we made the first time around with some of this infrastructure, thinking about nature on our infrastructure, for example, and using nature positive solutions to deal with some of the changing weather that we're facing can actually be a more efficient way to do things. But I think that when we look at the network in the future, what success will look like is that we've taken the connected power of vehicles as well as the autonomous part of the vehicles that are coming onto our network to manage flows in our network, and that we use the connected vehicles to help us manage the infrastructure. And we were just speaking about preventative maintenance, so that we're using connected vehicles as a live feed on the condition of our road network. And if you take the power that AI brings to us and you bring that all together, that makes what success would look like is a much better service at a lower cost.
Wow. I mean, it really requires agencies and leaders to think out of the box, isn't it? Because it's like you really need to kind of think in a very holistic way and try to see how to systematically address all these issues together, but not without any solutions. As you've mentioned, there are already examples, they're being applied, and that there are companies like Arup that are ready to provide that service to solve these problems. And I think we're coming to the end of our conversation, sadly. But viewers, if you're aware of IRF, you probably know that we're hosting our upcoming annual conference in Geneva, Switzerland, from the 16th to the 18th of November, under the theme that we just talked about: trust, delivery, innovation. Topics that we have that I've really enjoyed talking to Mike today. And thanks to Arup, who has so generously sponsored and support our flagship event of the year, that we are really looking forward to continuing these conversations with our community. So Mike, as final words, if you could leave one message for the Global Road community gathering at the IRF 2026 annual conference, what would it be?
Embrace the excitement. I mean, this is an exciting industry that we work in, and I think that I'm really interested in getting younger people involved in this, what is a fantastic industry.
Wow, that's great. And I hope I'm one of the younger people that I can get into.
I'm definitely not.
Hey, don't say that. Don't say that. I think we're all young. Young is a very relative thing, isn't it? So we're all very young, and we're all learning a lot from each other. But really, thank you very much, Mike, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. And I look forward to continuing these ideas and actually meeting you in person in Geneva in just a couple of months. So with that, we will close this conversation for now, and we continue that in Geneva. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.